Good morning, everyone. Okay, so this is the class for all BSc honor students. Acha. Now, as far as our last class was concerned, in the last class, I think we had discussed about the topics of ecological succession. Then we spoke about biological diversity, and I remember talking about definition, biodiversity, and the types. Then we spoke about the measures of biodiversity like species richness, alpha, beta, and gamma diversity, etc. We talked about the importance of biodiversity, and I think we have also talked about the causes of loss of biological diversity. Okay, so in today's class, the first thing with which we shall begin is biodiversity conservation. Now, see, any kind of conservation activity tries to maintain the resource quality. Now, since biodiversity is a resource for us, and without biodiversity it will be quite difficult for us to continue our lifestyle. So definitely biological diversity is a resource. So all conservation activities, it will try to what you can say, maintain biodiversity, maintain its quality, and maintain the quantity as a whole, so that in the future also we can continue to enjoy the ecological as well as economical services which biodiversity has to offer. Now, whenever we talk of conservation, as far as biodiversity is concerned, there are practically two modes of conservation. One is the ex situ conservation, and the other is the in situ conservation. So if we are talking of the in situ part, it means conserving that particular plant or animal in its natural habitat. It means conserving that particular plant or animal in its natural habitat. So if you are conserving a tiger in the forest, so it's in situ. If you are protecting a plant in its natural area, it's in situ. So because in situ conservation is what you can say, comparatively less costly, it promotes the evolutionary processes. It does not alter with the what you can say, behavioral patterns of the various plants and animals, etc. So in situ conservation is definitely a good approach towards biodiversity conservation. And regarding in situ conservation in our country, we primarily look into the protected areas, say for example the sanctuaries, the national parks, the biosphere reserves, etc. So between sanctuary, national parks, and biosphere reserves, there is always a what you can say, hairline difference. So let us understand the difference between sanctuaries, national parks, and these biosphere reserves. Now, the word sanctuary has come from the word sanct, which means some kind of a protected place. So whenever we are talking of sanctuaries, now these sanctuaries, they are generally comparatively smaller areas, and they are primarily targeted towards the conservation of a particular type of plant or animal species. So in a sanctuary we do not try to conserve the whole ecosystem in totality, but we try to conserve a particular type of plant or an animal, say for example a bird sanctuary, or maybe a crocodile sanctuary, etc. So where we are targeting to save or conserve or promote one particular type of animal or a plant. Now whenever we are talking of the national parks definitely are much larger in area compared to a sanctuary, and these national parks, they do not target to conserve a particular type of species, or they are not targeting to conserve a group of species or any community as a whole, but maybe they are trying to conserve the whole ecosystem as a whole. So the concept of national park is definitely to some extent different, where we try to conserve the entire ecosystem and not a particular type of species or a community. Now whenever we are talking of the biosphere reserves, now there are several biosphere reserves in our country. You can just go through the list in the internet, and these biosphere reserves are again comparatively larger in comparison to the sanctuaries, and the target remains the same, to conserve the entire ecosystem as a whole. For example, if you think of Sundarbans as a biosphere reserve, there we are not trying to conserve only the tiger, or there we are not trying to conserve a few birds or the crocodiles or the monkeys, etc., but we are trying to conserve the whole mangroves, the entire ecosystem. So if we can conserve the entire Sundarbans, obviously the flora fauna of that beautiful biosphere reserve, it will automatically achieve conservation status. So if you have been to a biosphere, I think several of you have been to the Sundarban. So generally in a biosphere reserve, you will come across two types of zones. One is a core zone and the other is a buffer zone. Now as far as the core zone is concerned, now in a core zone, human activity is very much restricted, so not much of a human activity is allowed there. Generally you are not allowed to go, tourism is not permitted, any kind of agricultural activity is not permitted. So the core zone is what you can say, kept exclusively for the habitability of those plants as well as animals. But if you come into the buffer zone is comparatively much more open to all these human activities. So some degrees of tourism is allowed there, which generates revenue. Then the locals can carry out some sort of an agriculture or some kind of economic activities. But as far as the core zone is concerned, you are definitely not allowed to take up such activities. Okay. Now this was about your in situ conservation, where we are trying to conserve the plant or animal in its natural habitat. And in our country, we generally carry out in situ conservation by promoting the protected areas like sanctuaries or national parks or biosphere reserves. Now, if we are talking of ex situ conservation, now sometimes what happens, conserving an animal or a plant in situ is not as easy. Maybe the animal is sick or there is not enough food resources available. So all these factors sometimes lead us to take that animal or plant out of its natural habitat and conserve it elsewhere. So when we are conserving that plant or animal in an area which is not its natural habitat, that is what we call as an ex situ conservation. And for animals, generally we talk of zoological parks or zoological gardens. You must have been to the Alipore zoological garden in Calcutta. And as far as plants are concerned, for plants, we create botanical gardens or botanical arboreta. So even in Howrah Shibpur, there is a botanical garden. So if you wish, you can visit them. So whenever we are finding that it is difficult to conserve that particular plant or animal in its natural habitat, so we will be shifting to no longer in situ, but ex situ will definitely be a better option. Now there are some advantages of ex situ conservation. Now ex situ conservation, as far as a plant or animal is concerned, is much more better and safer. They are guaranteed of food. As far as animals are concerned, they are guaranteed of regular treatment, checkups, etc. Medical facilities are available, and this definitely promotes conservation. But there are disadvantages also. First and foremost, if you think of that ex situ process, that ex situ process is definitely expensive. You need a lot of trained manpower. You need to invest on that, and then it also alters the behavioral patterns of the animals, particularly animals, and it may interrupt with the evolutionary processes, etc. So there is a lot of debate regarding which is better, in situ or ex situ, etc. Now there is one more approach towards ex situ conservation, which is more of what you can say, called as the germ plasm bank, or sometimes it is called as a gene bank, or it is also referred to as the cryopreservation technique. So what exactly is these techniques? Now generally what has been observed is that whenever we take a particular plant part or an animal part, a seed or some kind of a sperm cell or an egg cell or whatever, so whenever we can keep them under liquid nitrogen at around maybe say minus 196 degrees centigrade, now these particular biological parts, they can be preserved for extremely long spans of time. So if in the future there is any kind of an extinction event from the natural areas of that particular plant or animal, so we can regenerate them from their biological stocks. So that is what is called as the cryopreservation technique, or the germplasm technique, or gene bank, or seed bank. And there are numerous names depending on the type of application that technique is put to. But commonly cryopreservation refers to conserving a biological part, a biological cell or callus or plantlet or whatever you can think of, eggs, sperms, etc., under liquid nitrogen at minus 196 degrees centigrade. And the advantage is that at such low temperatures you can preserve that plant part or animal part for very long spans of time, and you can regenerate that entire organism in the future if needed. Okay, so as far as XC2 is concerned, we learnt about zoological gardens, zoological parks. We talked about botanical gardens and arboreta, and then we talked of the cryopreservation technique. And as far as in situ is concerned, we talked of sanctuaries, national parks, and biosphere reserves. Now, apart from all these, you can also conserve biodiversity with the help of some legal support. There should be laws in a country where biodiversity is high, and remember, biodiversity is particularly high in the tropical regions. In countries like India, you go to Africa, where the rainforests are present. You go to the Amazon, where the rainforests are present. Now, in these places, biodiversity is extremely high, and where biodiversity is high, obviously there will be some sort of a crime related to procuring of biodiversity, so that requires some kind of a legal support. So in our country, we also have some kind of a legal framework to protect these plants and animals. You have the Biodiversity Conservation Act 2002, which targets to conserve Indian biodiversity, and there are also other acts to prevent what you can say transport of biological products from our country. So there are IPRs, etc. So there are a lot of legalities associated with it. So we will just remember the Biological Diversity Act 2002, which aims to promote and conserve our biological diversity as a whole. Okay. Now, after talking about these things, one more term which we should know regarding biodiversity is a term which you have heard very frequently. It's known as the biodiversity hotspot. It's known as the biodiversity hotspot. Now, what are these hotspots? Now, these hotspots are certain geographical regions which are characterized by very high degree of endemism. Endemism means that a few plants, animals are there which are found exclusively there. For example, if you want to see the Asiatic lion, you have to go to the Gir forest. If you have to see the Royal Bengal tiger, you have to go to the Sundarbans. So you can say that the Royal Bengal tiger is endemic to Sundarbans, or you can say the Asiatic lion is endemic to the Gir forest. Same goes with the peacock. Same goes with the clouded leopard. So there are numerous such plants and animal species which are found exclusively in India. So there are geographical regions in our country, particularly four, which exhibit very high degree of endemism and which support considerable amount of biological diversity. So such places which support a very high degree of endemism, they are called as your biodiversity hotspots. And as far as India is concerned, we have four biodiversity hotspots, say the Northeast Himalayas, the Eastern Himalayas, then you have the Western Ghats, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So the northeast of our country, the Eastern Himalayas, the Western Ghats, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. So these are considered to be biodiversity hotspots because of, number one, they support a very high degree of endemism. There are plants, animals which are found exclusively there and nowhere else in the world. And then you have what you can say. They also support a very high degree of other biological diversity. So the faunal richness, the floristic richness in these plants are quite high. So that is why they are called as biodiversity hotspots. Now, on if you think of the global context, you'll be finding that there are about 20 hotspots in the world. There are around 20 hotspots in the world, and out of these 20, there are 12 hotspots which lie in the tropical rainforest region, say for Hawaii, Colombia, Western Ecuador, the uplands of West Amazonia, the Atlantic forest of Brazil. Then you have the Eastern Madagascar, and numerous such places are there. So, on a global context, there are maybe around 20 hotspots, and in the Indian context, there are around 4 hotspots. Now, whenever we are talking of biodiversity, now several terms come to our mind pertaining to the existence of these species. So often we hear of terms such as extinct species, endangered species, vulnerable species, etc. So we also need to know what is the meaning of these terms. Now, say for example, if you say that a particular species has become extinct. Now, what does it mean that a species has become extinct? So it simply indicates that that particular species is no longer existing in the wild. That particular species is no longer existing in the wild. That is why you are saying that it's an extinct species. Now, extinctions can be of various types. Species can be locally extinct, it can be globally extinct, it can be ecologically extinct. So what is the meaning of this term? So if you say that species has become undergone local extinction, so that means uh, it has become extinct, but pertaining to a particular locality. So previously it was found in that locality, no longer it's found there. So that is why you are saying that maybe the species has become locally extinct. Now, when you are saying that a particular species has become globally extinct, that means it is no longer found on this planet anymore. Say, for example, the passenger pigeon, or the dodo, or there are some subspecies of tiger which have become extinct in the recent past. So these extinctions are global extinctions actually. The organism, the species, its traces are no longer found throughout the world. And then there is another kind of extinction which we call as ecological extinction. So what is the meaning of ecological extinction? So that means the organism is there, but its number has become so few that it is no longer able to perform its designated ecological services. So because due to the paucity of his number, due to the dearth of his number, as it is no longer able to perform its ecological services, that is why we say that that particular organism has become ecologically extinct. So extinctions practically are of three types: local, global, and ecological. So if you say it's locally extinct, so that means it was previously found in a particular locality, but now it's no longer present there. If you say it's globally extinct, so that means throughout the world it's no longer it's no longer seen. It has been wiped off the face of earth. And if you are saying that it has become ecologically extinct, so that means that organism is still physically present, but its number has become so less that it is no longer able to perform its designated ecological function. So then you are saying that it has become ecologically extinct. Okay, so after talking about these extinctions, etc., just one more term we shall discuss before rounding off this chapter on biological diversity. So, I think you have heard of the term IUCN Red Data Books. IUCN Red Data Books. Now, what is IUCN? International Union for Conservation of Nature and Natural Resources. So, and what are these Red Data Books? Now, these Red Data Books, they contain information of plants and animals which are threatened, so if you are talking of the red data books, they will list those plants, those animals which are threatened, vulnerable, endangered, etc., etc. So what is an endangered species? Now, an endangered species is a species that have a very high likelihood of becoming extinct in the near future. So if you find that a species has a very high likelihood of becoming extinct in the near future, then you can say that that particular species has become endangered. So what is a vulnerable species? Now, a vulnerable species may become endangered in the near future. So that which might become extinct in the near future, that is endangered, and that which might become endangered in the near future, that is called vulnerable. So these red data books, they practically list all these informations that on a global scale, which species are endangered, which species are vulnerable, who are what you can say becoming extinct, etc. And remember that whenever we talk of extinctions, we think of dinosaurs who became extinct around 65 million years ago. But in the recent world, maybe every year we are losing our biological stock. So right now on a global scale, we say that there are around 1.5 million species, but the fact is not that. The number of species, how many species are there, we don't know. So we are not aware how many books are there in our library. And even before the books are being documented, cataloged, they are being lost. The same is being happening with the biological world. So we are losing plants, we are losing animals at a rate uh, which is much higher than our rate of cataloging, than our rate of documentation. So if we are not able to document, if we are not able to catalog what is present, so and if we are losing them, then maybe we are losing on some vital products, maybe we are losing on some vital medicines. some vital outputs. So that is definitely a cause of concern as far as the planet's biodiversity is concerned. Okay, so just before I end up the chapter and begin with a new chapter, if you have any questions pertaining to biodiversity, you may ask. If you have any questions pertaining to biodiversity, you may ask. Just ask any questions if you have pertaining to biodiversity. Anyone? Okay, since you don't have much of a question, so just before I end the chapter, I would like to list a few of endangered species in India. Now, as far as endangered plant species in India are concerned, there are many of them. Say, for example, Raulfia serpentina, which in Bengali we call as Sharpogandha. Then you have the aloe vera, that is also an endangered plant species. In Bengali we call it as Grit Kumari. And then you have the Nepenthes khasiana, Koloshpotri. You have Drosera indica, Surjo Shishir. So you have the Nitum ula, the Nitum, and there are many other endangered plant species. So if you are thinking of the endangered animal species, as far as India is concerned, you have the Panthera tigris, the Indian tiger. You have the Asiatic lion, Panthera leoparsica. Uh, these are endangered species. Then you have the Rhinoceros unicornis, the one-horned Rhinoceros unicornis. Then you have the Panthera pardus, the common leopard. So these are endangered animal species in India. So the Indian tiger, Panthera tigris, the Asiatic lion, Panthera leoparsica. Then you have the Rhinoceros unicornis, one-horned rhino, and the common panther, Panthera pardus. Now there are several birds in India also which are endangered. Even our national bird, the peacock, Pavo cristatus. Then you have the eagle, Accipiter gentilis. Then there are several, what you can say, reptiles which are endangered, like the turtles, the Chilonia midas. Then you have the gharials, Gavialis gangeticus, and there are several endemic species also which are endangered in our country. So you can just go through the list, and the list is a very updated list in the internet. You'll be finding them, and if you don't have any doubts, then we can just have an introduction about the chapter on pollution. So once again, I'm asking you that if you have any doubts pertaining to your biodiversity, you can ask. Else, I will begin with the next chapter. We don't have much time actually. Anyone? Okay. Uh, since there is not much of a doubt, so we shall begin with the next chapter, that is chapter number 5 of our syllabus. And this is also a very long drawn chapter, that is environmental pollution. Now, whenever we are talking of pollution, that means it can be any kind of an activity that deteriorates resource quality. So pollution is any kind of activity that will deteriorate what you can say, resource quality. So that activity may be a natural activity, or that activity may be a man-made activity. So if you are thinking of natural activities which cause pollution, like you can think of natural forest fires, you can think of volcanic eruptions, you can think of natural decomposition processes in the water body. So these are all natural pollutive processes over which we don't have much of a hand. But the processes about which we are concerned is the man-made pollution, or the anthropogenic pollution. So, and this pollution is practically affecting, deteriorating the resource quality of every possible resource you can think of. That may be air resource, that may be water resource, that may be soil resource, that may be your wildlife resource, forest resource. So every possible resource without which our lifestyles will not become sustainable. So these resources have become polluted. These resources quality are deteriorating. These are facts. So the entire chapter will be dealing on this. So in this chapter we will be focusing on some specific types of pollution, say air pollution. You can note them down. Air pollution, then you have water pollution. Water pollution will include both surface and groundwater. Water pollution will include both surface and groundwater. Then you have soil pollution. Then you have noise pollution, radioactive pollution, thermal pollution. So that's all I think. Okay, solid waste pollution due to solid waste. You can add that on. So it's a very long drawn chapter. Acha, so if we are talking of air pollution now, air pollution in a very what you can say, on a very serious note, you can say that addition of undesirable substances to air, which deteriorates air's quality, and which interferes with the legitimate use of air. So whenever you are thinking of the legitimate use of air, you are thinking of that we are using the air for breathing, and that is one of the most legitimate uses. So if your air is polluted with numerous pollutants, you have numerous pollutants in the modern days. So you are no longer able to utilize the air. Say if you think of the air quality 500 years back or 1000 years back, so that air quality is way different from the air which we are breathing now. So air pollution is definitely the addition of such undesirable substances into the air, which deteriorates air's quality, which interferes with legitimate use of air. Okay, so these undesirable substances which we are adding to air, which are causing deterioration of the air's qualities, what we call as air pollutants. And these air pollutants, you may further classify them as primary air pollutants and secondary air pollutants. Now, what is the difference between these primary and secondary pollutants? Now, as far as these primary pollutants are concerned, they are released from various sources. That may be say industries, burning of fossil fuels, automobile sector, agricultural burnings, anything from the domestic sector. So these primary pollutants remain in the environment as it is. I mean to say, they are released in the environment as it is produced. So if you are producing CO2 from your stack in the factory, so CO2 is released as it is. So but they will include your oxides of carbon, oxides of nitrogen, oxides of sulfur. Then you have your numerous particulate materials, that may be SPM, suspended particulate matter, or RSPM, respirable suspended particulate matter, etc. We'll come down to these parts later. And as far as your secondary pollutants are concerned, now these secondary pollutants are not released from any source, but once these primary pollutants are released, once they're in the atmosphere, they may undergo some kind of a reaction, they may undergo some kind of a chemical change, and from those primary pollutants we get secondary pollutants. So for example, pan, peroxyacetyl nitrate, say for example tropospheric ozone, that is also a secondary pollutant. Tropospheric ozone which is found in the troposphere, that is bad ozone, and ozone which is found in the stratosphere, that is called good ozone, which protects us from the harmful UVB of the sun. Achha. And so primary pollutants are released from a source, and these primary pollutants undergo some kind of a reaction to give us what we call as secondary pollutants, like peroxyacetyl nitrate, peroxybenzoyl nitrate, then you have your tropospheric ozone, etc. Okay, now as far as the sources of air pollution are concerned, now the sources, you must always think of it as to be a natural source as well as a man-made source, or which is also sometimes called as anthropogenic source, man-made or anthropogenic source. So natural sources of air pollution, just now I was talking about them: volcanic eruptions, storms, dust storms. Then you have natural forest fires. So they also cause what you can say air pollution. But the main cause of concern is about the man-made sources. Now there are numerous man-made sources, particularly if you think of the industrial sector. The industry releases tons and tons of what you can say GHGs, greenhouse gases, into the environment. And then you have the automobile sector, which is primarily dependent on fossil fuels. So although we are now talking about the electric automobiles, but that will still take some time. Replacement will take some time, and till then, since the economy is absolutely focused on the fossil fuels, petrol, then you have coal for power production. The power production sector is also primarily responsible for air pollution. So until and unless there is a shift of the economy from the conventional fossil fuels to the non-conventional ones, we will continue to suffer from such pollution activities. So one of the primary causes we have definitely listed is the automobile sector. Then you have the industrial sector. Then you have even the domestic sector is contributing to air pollution. Air pollution. So in our houses we are also burning fuels for the purpose of cooking. That may be you are burning some kind of an LPG, or uh, if you go into the, say, the BPL sector, the below poverty line sector of our country, they are still mostly using some kind of coal, or maybe cut down wooden parts, or maybe they're burning kerosene. So all these fuels, whenever you are burning them, definitely you are releasing products like SOx, oxides of sulfur, NOx, oxides of nitrogen, oxides of carbon, various particulates, etc., and that is definitely contributing to air pollution. Now you must also remember that the natural processes, although we are talking of say volcanism, forest fires, etc., but there is one more natural process which also contributes to air pollution, that is the natural degradation process, the natural aerobic degradation process. So whenever plants, animals, etc., die, the microbes, they utilize the oxygen from the environment, and they degrade the dead body. So that also causes some kind of a pollution, foul smell, odor pollution, release of CO2, etc. So that is always there. So apart from that, if you think of one more activity which causes air pollution, that is the construction activity. The construction sector also tremendously causes air pollution. So these are some of the sources of air pollution. Now as far as your examination is concerned, so just note down a few of the air pollutants about which you will study. You will study their sources and effects. So just note down. Write down number one, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide. Number two, you have carbon monoxide. Number three, oxides of sulfur. Oxides of sulfur, SO2 and SO3. Then you have maybe oxides of nitrogen. Nitrogen has 5 oxides, I think you know that. NO, NO2, N2O, N2O3, N2O5. So nitrogen has 5 oxides. So oxides of nitrogen. Then you will study about the hydrocarbons. There are numerous hydrocarbons released into the environment, particularly from the automobile sector. There may be aldehydes or ketones, or etc. So you will be studying about these hydrocarbons, and then you have to study about say the tropospheric ozone. That is also a harmful air pollutant, tropospheric ozone. Then you need to also study about particulate matters, both SPM and RSPM, suspended particulate matter as well as respirable suspended particulate matter. So what is the difference actually? Now see, there are numerous sources of particulate matter. Naturally, if you think of volcanoes, forest fires, they release particulate matter. Even storms, dust storms also release particulate matter. But particulate matter is also released by activities like the construction activity, the what you have, the stone quarries, the places where stones are crushed, the crushery industry. So all these release tremendous amounts of particulate matter. But we are not much concerned about all particulate matter. Those particulate matter which have size or which have diameter greater than 10 microns, 1 micron mane 10 to the power minus 6 meters. So those particulate matter which are of diameter greater than 10 microns, they do not enter our respiratory system. They can be trapped and blocked by the nasal hairs. But we are mainly concerned about particulate matter of less than 10, PM10. So if you say that particulate matter is of less than 10, they can find access to your respiratory system, your nasal hair, etc. cannot block them. Now there is one more particulate matter of diameter 2.5 microns, which we call as PM 2.5. Now if you are encountering particulate matter of 2.5 microns diameter, then it will directly find passage to your respiratory system, and very frequently it's the lung that is affected. So these particulate matters are of serious concern, and several people, particularly working in the say the collieries, they suffer from coal dust infections, people working with the transportation of sand, etc., people working in the stone crushers, etc. So they very frequently suffer from numerous lung diseases pertaining to these particulate matter. Say people working in the colliery, they suffer from a disease called what you can say, black lung disease, also called as anthracosis, where the coal dust accumulates in the lung, causing severe pulmonary disorders, pneumonia like symptoms, breathlessness, etc. People working in the transportation of sand, etc., they suffer from a disease called silicosis, where the sand dust, silica, it accumulates in the lungs. So there are such problems associated with the dust particles. So for your examination purpose, definitely study CO2, CO, then you have oxides of sulfur, oxides of nitrogen, hydrocarbons. You will study your particulate matter. So whenever you are studying, you will be studying what are the sources and what are their effects. Sources and effects, that is how you will be studying them. I will provide you with some notes on that. So with that, we will be ending today's class. In the next class, we will continue our discussion with what you can say, pollution. So if you have any doubts, please ask me, else I'll be ending the class. If you have any doubts, please ask me, else I'll be ending the class. We meet again on next Wednesday. Okay, since you do not have much of a doubt, so I think we'll be ending the class, and we meet again next Wednesday, and shortly I'll be uploading the video in the YouTube. So those who haven't attended the class, you can go through that. Okay then, thank you.